Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Apologies, there hasn't been a video for a couple of weeks. Frankly, there hasn't been too much to really talk about in the realm of polling and, looking at the map and what have you. So I didn't want to make a video if there wasn't really anything to talk about. But here we are. We do now have something to talk about. We've got the Nowcast for the second half of April. Came out last night. And, yeah, look, a terrible, disastrous result for Labour again. If this were to happen in a real election, going from over 400 seats down to almost under 200, yeah, catastrophic for them. And we're going to look at that in a minute. They're losing out to the SNP in Scotland and to the Reform in England. And obviously that's not new. That's what's been the case for a long time. But they just keep getting lower and lower. They're almost, as I say now, almost down below 200 seats. So catastrophic for them, and they are, we spoke in the last video, didn't we? It was about the Conservatives being sort of erased from British politics. Well, Labour's kind of going the same way. I think it's a little bit different, and we'll get into that because they still have that inner city vote, but they are disappearing outside of the cities and outside of the urban areas. Outside of that, look, Reform seem to have the momentum again. They haven't made huge gains in the last Nowcast. I think they're up about just under 20 seats more. We're going to look at some of the ones they've won. And all this has happened on really not much change in the polling, maybe 1% here or there for each party, perhaps even less than 1% on average overall. And this is the change that happens and backs up what I was saying in the last video as well, in the last Nowcast video, about just how close everything is, the margins being so tight in British politics at the moment. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please do hit the subscribe button. If you're interested in British politics, we are trying to build a community here of people interested in British politics. And look, frankly, now is a great time to join up and be a part of this community, because British politics is becoming more interesting than it's been for a very long time. I actually made a slip of the tongue in the last video and said that British politics is currently very polarised. It's pretty much the complete opposite of that. It's actually remarkably fragmented. Certainly the most fragmented it's ever been in my life, probably the most fragmented it's ever been since the Second World War. So yeah, please do come and join the community by subscribing to the channel, and make sure you hit the notification bells to get an update with each video. We've got the local elections coming up on the 1st of May. We're going to be doing some coverage of that, and I'll speak a bit more about that later. So you can see the numbers there. I've spoken through some of them in terms of who is gaining, who's losing. We're now going to have a look at the map. Alright, so here is the map of the UK. You can only really see England and Wales there at the moment, well, Northern Ireland too, probably. But we'll look at Scotland a little bit, because I don't tend to talk much about Scotland, partly because I'm a little bit out of touch with Scotland, frankly. I don't know too much about what goes on up there. We'll have a quick look maybe later, but this is England and Wales, and this is where a lot of the changes are happening in this Nowcast. And I mentioned, didn't I, just there in the intro, about how the Labour presence on this map is disappearing outside of urban areas. Well, you can see up in the north, right on the border with Scotland, up in the north of England, you can see quite a bit of red there, but we're going to get into those. But outside of that, it's London in here. London is still very Labour centric. Around Bristol is very Labour, but the Greens are edging in there, as we've seen in the last few Nowcasts. And then outside of that, it's Liverpool up in the northwest, a bit of Manchester up in the northwest, Leeds, they got a few, and then the other cities, Norwich, they're both Labour. But outside of there, you can see there is very, very little red on the map, and that's going to be a big problem for the Labour Party going forward. They're getting destroyed across the country, as we've mentioned many times, in that red wall, that strip across the north of England. They're just being obliterated by Reform at the moment, and the margins are increasing for Reform in a lot of those constituencies as well. And one development that we've been sort of waiting on to happen is in the south of Wales, and that's what I want to kind of focus in on first. We have focused on the south of Wales a few times because of how close the margins have been for Reform catching up to Labour down in this part of the world. Now they've had Llanelli and Neath and Swansea East, and sorry, I have to apologise for my Welsh pronunciation. I appreciate that it's gash, and I mean no offence by it. I am doing my best. So they've had these two for a while. That they're stretching out their lead there, 6% almost in Swansea East, almost 10% in Llanelli. But the rest now have started to flip to Reform, so they've now got Bridgend. These are going to be very small margins because it's the first time these have shown up as Reform on our map. But Bridgend going to Reform, Rontha and Ogmore going to Reform. Chris Bryant, he's been a Labour MP for a very long time, set to lose his seat. Merthyr Tydfil going now to Reform, also Caerphilly, Newport West and Torfan. So all these seats, we focused in on those in previous Nowcasts where the margins had been 2% or less in most of those, and now finally Reform have managed to edge ahead. But look, again, the margin very, very slim. All it takes is Reform to stumble 1% or Labour to somehow for once find an improvement in the polling, and those would all flip back to red, and that's how close politics is in Britain, really across the country, seeing that in South Wales as well. Interestingly, the Reform Party have also actually managed to take Mid and South Pembrokeshire off the Conservatives. Now, currently it's a Labour seat, they won it in 2024. Most of the Nowcasts up to this point have shown this being a Conservative seat. I actually can't remember. I think this was Conservative in the last Nowcast. But now, I think for the first time, it's showing up as a Reform gain too. So, look, great progress for Reform in South Wales. We know they're doing well in Wales. Obviously, we've got the Senedd elections in 2026. Which we haven't focused on yet. Of course, we'll get close to the time, the channel will start looking at that a bit more. But they are projected to do very well in those Welsh elections next year. And it's starting to play out now in the general election map. And you can see Reform are a significant presence in Wales now. Also, one other change in Wales in this Nowcast is up in the north of Wales, where Plaid have actually gained Bangor and Aberconwy off of the Labour Party. And again, you see Reform are in second place there. If Reform can push on towards that 30% mark in the polling, then they would probably end up getting this constituency too. But, you know, if Reform get to 30%, then there will be an awful lot of constituencies changing hands to Reform, and that would be a very interesting video. But yeah, again, for Plaid, we don't speak much about Plaid, but they've managed to eke out again there on this Nowcast. So look, here's the change map. We'll briefly look at this because actually at first glance you don't see too much new to what we already know. You know, like I said, that band across the north and into the Midlands, a lot going to Reform. We know that. Reform actually starting to pick up quite a few constituencies just on the outskirts of Birmingham now. Birmingham Northfield, Halesowen, I think it's been going to Reform for a little while. Stourbridge, they're now ahead into Dudley. They've been ahead in for a while, up to almost 15% in Dudley now. Tipton and Wedsbury, they've been ahead for a while. We'll come around to Birmingham and Erdington, they've been ahead there for a little while too. They're also not far behind the Workers' Party of Britain in Birmingham Yardley. They are actually still trailing Labour, who are in second place in this constituency. Obviously, this is Jess Phillips' constituency. She got in the news recently by announcing the government has changed their mind on the inquiry into grooming gangs, and she got quite a few pelters for that online. So she's currently losing her seat to the Workers' Party of Britain, but Reform certainly very much in the race for that seat as well. So yeah, you can see Reform starting to eat in to votes around Birmingham. And look, the rest of it we've really spoken about. Like I say, Reform making inroads in Essex. I don't think they picked up any more actually from the last Nowcast. Certainly down in the south of Essex, they've pretty much colonised this whole area actually, because obviously this one's not changed. This is already Reform. This is James McMurdoch's constituency, and you can see that whole area around the Thames Estuary, sort of North Kent and South Essex, is just being dominated now by the Reform Party. The Conservatives holding on in Southend West and Lee by less than 2%. Obviously, current if polling keeps going the way it's going, or the trends stay as they are, you expect to see that eventually flip to Reform as well. But again, let's look at the margins. Only 1% ahead in Southend East over the Labour Party for Reform there. Raleigh and Wickford are actually up to almost 5% ahead, so that's bad news for Mark Francois. 12% ahead in Balsall and Billericay, so Richard Holden is well, almost certain to lose his seat at the moment. Brentwood and Ongar 2.5%, Malden 2%, and Harlow up to 5%. So actually, they're eking out bigger gains in South Essex, eating into that Conservative vote in particular. North of Kent, again 3.1% in Faversham. Sittingbourne and Sheppey up to 13% ahead there. Chatham and Aylesford 11%, Rochester and Strood 10%, Gravesham 2.5%, Dartford 3%. So look, some of them are a bit marginal, but you can see Reform are starting to cut out a sort of safe area for themselves. It's not quite safe. I'd say anything above 15% is really safe. But they're starting to get up towards that 10% mark, where it's much more in the sort of lean territory. You know, if you remember that video we did a few weeks ago with the council seats, where we had the safe, lean, tilt sort of categories. You know, a lot of these constituents at the moment are in the tilt category. They're very close, almost a toss up. But Reform are starting now to eke out these areas of the country where we can start saying, you know, their vote is actually pretty safe. And I think, you know, that area, Kent, around that Thames estuary, certainly is an area for them. You can see them starting to appear down in Cornwall. Again, I can't remember. I think Camborne and Redruth is a new one for this Nowcast. 0.1% ahead of the Labour Party. So again, this is too close to call, really. The Nowcast is calling it for the Reform Party, but they're just starting to eat in the south, in the southwest. Southeast Cornwall, they're now ahead as well. I think that's new for this Nowcast, ahead of the Conservatives, 3%. They did have St Austell and Newquay in the last one, and they have Plymouth Moorview. So that, yeah, like I say, just starting to eat in to some of these constituencies in the southwest. The other thing that's worth mentioning is, if you remember, I said the Liberal Democrats are at their ceiling. They won't gain any more seats than what they've got. And look, you can see they have actually, according to this Nowcast, gained a few seats. But I stand by my comment. When I said the Liberal Democrats aren't going to gain any more seats, they're at their ceiling. I think what I mean by that is they're not about to go and form a government, a majority government. They're not going to win 326 seats. They are, I said they're not second in many or any constituencies. Clearly they're second in some, down in the south of England in particular, where they're the main competitors to the Tories, really. That they are second in a few of those, and as you can see here, with the Tories falling away in the polling, the Liberal Democrats make hay and gain 5 seats down there in the south. So look, but I stand by what I say. The Liberal Democrats are at their ceiling. They may get up to 80 seats potentially, but they're not going to do what Reform are currently doing at the moment. Who knows in a few years' time, but as it stands right now, they're not in that position to go and start talking about having hundreds of seats to their name, which Reform have already started to do. We'll have a quick look at these. The Liberal Democrats are taking away from the Tories, though. So North Dorset, just a 1.3% lead at the moment. But again, this is what I've said for a little while. Really bad news for the Tories, getting squeezed on the right by the Reform Party, and sort of squeezed from the left, I suppose, by the Liberal Democrats, and the Tories are just kind of are hurting because they don't really have an identity right now. Romsey and Southampton North, less than 1% for the Liberal Democrats, less than 2% in East Hampshire. Farnham and Borden, less than 2%, and again 2%. Godalming and Ash, Jeremy Hunt, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer. So look, tight margins for the Liberal Democrats there. They're just eking out ahead, and if we look at the numbers, actually, you can see it's not a Liberal Democrat surge. They're actually down 1% in Godalming and Ash, down actually up 0.5% there, down 0.5%, essentially no change in Romsey, and down 0.5% in North Dorset. So there's no Lib Dem surge here. It's just the Conservative numbers have fallen off. Also another Lib Dem constituency up in Shropshire, South Shropshire, they eked out less than 0.5% gain. Again, they've actually lost 0.5% on their vote since 2024, but the Conservatives have dropped 4%. And you can see Reform are not out of the race up here either. So look, that's the thing with the Liberal Democrats. There's been no great surge towards them. I don't speak about them much just because they haven't moved in the polls really, and if anything they've gone down 1% or 2% since the election. But it's just, they're gaining off of the Conservatives being so hapless at the moment. And that's the story there. So, that's the change map. I think we've spoken about all the relevant bits there. So let's now go and have a look at the margin tab, because, again, this is where things get interesting. So here it is. This is the margins of victory tab. If you've not watched the videos before, this is the sort of tab on the map that shows us the margin of victory for each party in the constituencies that they're projected to win. The lighter the colour means the closer it is in the polls, and the darker the colour, the safer the seat, basically. Now, I hope with that information you can see that there is, like I said in the last video, there is a great lack of safe seats in this country at the moment. Now you can see, like I mentioned earlier, quite deep red in the city areas. Like I pointed out earlier, London, Liverpool, Manchester, although you can see Manchester's really starting to fade, actually. But Manchester, around Leeds, again, Leeds also fading, down into Sheffield. And outside of that, you can see there's not really much dark red. As for dark blue, hardly any. You can see there's a little bit of dark blue right up here in Richmond, Northallerton, Rishi Sunak's constituency. There's a bit here, Rutland and Stamford. But really, that is it. Just north of London, Hertsmere, they're doing fine. In Ruislip, they're safe there too. But there is not much dark blue, and that was the thesis of the last video about the Tories essentially getting pushed off the map by Reform and others, because the majority of their seats are very, very tight, or at least, not safe. But we did that last video, so I don't want to talk about that on this video. As for Reform, look, a lot of their seats, the vast majority of their seats are in that sort of lighter category. You can see that, but like I said earlier, you can see they're starting to eke out these darker shades. So we looked at Essex, South Essex and North Kent. You can see there, hopefully, that the colours, if I zoom in, hopefully, you can see the colours are getting a bit darker there in some of those constituencies. You can see the ones they won in 2024 are already pretty dark. Clacton there, safe. Great Yarmouth, as I mentioned before, it's actually technically not a Reform constituency because Rupert Lowe won it. The Nowcast is still saying that Reform would be safe here. It would be interesting to see, but I don't know. Like I said in the last video, Rupert Lowe individually in Great Yarmouth may well be very popular. He may challenge Reform there. I don't know, but for the purpose of the video, Great Yarmouth safe. Richard Tice, Boston and Skegness safe. Ashfield for Lee Anderson safe. Amber Valley, because this was one of the first ones. This is not a Reform seat currently, but this was one of the first ones that the Nowcast showed Reform winning. That is now considered a Reform safe seat. Barnsley South is now safe seat for Reform. Again, that was another early one that went on the Nowcast last year. But outside of that, there isn't too much dark Reform colour. Apologies, by the way, if the colours are hard to see on the video. I have noticed and I have seen your comments saying that the colours are actually pretty hard to tell between Tory and Reform on this screen. Unfortunately, this isn't my map. This is electionmaps.uk. I always put the link in the comments so you guys can go and check it out for yourselves. It's not my map. I'm just using the site, and I have no control over the colours here. So I apologise for that. So look, Reform are eking out these gains across the country, but in a lot of places they are very marginal, they're very tight, and of course you'd expect that. This is a new party that's coming through, but they are starting to get safer seats in parts of the country. And we look at South Wales, and we said a lot of those are very light colours because they're all pretty much less than 2%, if even that much, ahead for Reform down there. Look, the safest seats in the country mostly are Lib Dems, or outside of the cities, are Lib Dem seats, and I said that in the last video. You can see that dark orange colour in the south, where the Liberal Democrats are safely ahead of anyone else. Those five that we looked at in the south, you can probably see are quite light yellow colours, where they're just 2% or less ahead. So look, like I say, a dearth of safe seats across the country. Politics remarkably fragmented in the UK at the moment, particularly in England. But the last video I mentioned about the Tories getting wiped out essentially because they have no safe seats and all their seats are very, very close, very marginal. Well, the same really or similar can be said for Labour once you move outside of those urban areas, which is the point I've been trying to make in this video. And you can probably see, I hope, that all these red constituencies outside of those cities, the rural areas, the bigger constituencies, are a much lighter shade of red, a pink essentially. And if we go back to South Wales, you can see Reform have already eked out gains in some of these constituencies, but the other ones that remain, if you move outside of Cardiff, where it is slightly darker red, we look at Cardiff South and Penarth, where they're 13% ahead and 12.5% ahead in Cardiff North. But outside of that, we go to Newport East, and they're only less than almost just 1% ahead. Vale of Glamorgan, 1% ahead, 3-horse race, Conservatives in the running there too. Cardiff West even, Plaid right on the back of Labour there by less than 1%, so that could be another Plaid gainer if the next round of polling shows Labour falling off even further. Pontypridd is really, really close with Reform again, essentially a toss-up. The Nowcast calling this one for Labour. uh, sorry, I saw the name and I immediately got fear. Blaenau Gwent, I apologise. Close, not a bit more than the other ones, but less than 5%. Aberfan, 4.5%, and even in there, Swansea West, less than 2%. So you can see, like, across the whole of South Wales, outside of those sort of 3 Cardiff constituencies there, the Labour Party are under huge pressure, mostly from Reform, a bit from Plaid as well. But, also we come down to North East Somerset and Hanham. This is going to be interesting because Dan Norris is currently under investigation for allegations against him. And there may well be a by-election here. And actually it looks like the Conservatives would be in a pretty good place to win that by-election. But look at Reform. They're by no means out of the running there. They're only 5% behind. And, if they threw everything at it, who knows? It would be interesting to see, by the way, if Jacob Rees-Mogg would make a return to challenge that seat. This was, of course, his old seat that he lost in 2024. But again, that light pink colour, I thought that'd just be an interesting one to talk about because it's, a bit of context around that at the moment. If we move up to the north, you can see these big, huge constituencies up in Northumberland and sort of Cumberland, where they're currently red, but on the margin tab that we're on here, you can see just how light a pink it is. And Northumberland will look at less than 0.5% ahead. Again, look, it's a 3-horse race. This is what I mean. The politics is so fragmented in the UK at the moment. So less than 0.5% ahead for Labour there. They're just clinging on. Hexham, they're less than, essentially it's a toss-up with the Conservatives. In Penrith and Solway, again, 3-horse race, 1% in it. Whitehaven and Workington, 4% ahead of Reform. Barrow and Furness, 3-horse race, 2.5% in it. Morecambe and Lunsdale, 1.7% ahead. And again, a 3-horse race. Remarkably tight up in the north. It's going to be very fascinating to see who takes the bull by the horns up here and actually gets ahead. Now, of course, we know Reform are doing very well up in the northeast, and you can see that there's more pink Labour up here. Cramlington, they're 2.7% ahead. In Newcastle upon Tyne Central and West, this is a city constituency. Reform putting them under pressure there with 4%. So, Labour are in real danger of just kind of disappearing outside of these cities. Selby, Reform now less than 1.5% behind. Doncaster North, Ed Miliband's constituency, it's a toss-up, really. It's 0.3%. So Ed Miliband, another cabinet secretary, looking over his shoulder as Reform catch up to his lead there. Colne Valley, the Conservatives in second place. There's only 1.8% in it. Reform, again, around 4% behind. So they're definitely in the running. It's really a big problem for Labour, this. And, we've already seen them lose, like I say, over 200 seats. And they're on the precipice of losing a bunch more if there is any sort of small change in the polling where, since 2024, since July, the Labour Party has just consistently lost vote share in the polls. Now, they have kind of plateaued around about where we currently are, and at the moment it's essentially Labour and Reform tied up around 25% and the Conservatives a few percent below them, and that's where things have kind of plateaued for a few weeks now. So we're waiting for a catalyst to spark a change in either direction for each of the parties. And when that happens, this map is going to change dramatically because of how close it all is. Let's keep looking at some of these really close Labour constituencies. So Rushcliffe has become down into the Midlands, 4.6% ahead there. Broxtowe, they're less than 2% ahead. Again, Reform catching up. Nottingham North, 2.5% ahead. Loughborough, 2% ahead. Corby and East Northamptonshire, even 1.3% ahead. Reform actually doing really well in sort of this Northamptonshire. Remember, there's county council elections in Northamptonshire as well in May. But Reform actually starting to win constituencies in this part of the country as we move into Cambridgeshire. Look, only 1.1% ahead and less than 1% ahead in North East Cambridgeshire. But they're starting to win constituencies in Cambridgeshire, which I didn't necessarily have on my radar earlier on. Even as we come down to Milton Keynes North, it's 3.4% ahead. That one, the Conservatives, if all the Conservatives need is to gain a couple of percent, and their outlook will change dramatically. I mean, they're still going to be in a pretty rough spot compared to where they have been, considering they were in government for 14 years. But, there are a few constituencies you can see where if the Conservatives are able to eke out a percent or two gain at the expense of Labour, they will actually flip a few constituencies to themselves, and their number will look a little bit more rosy, at least. And look, if we move down into Birmingham, you can just see the Labour Party being put under a huge amount of pressure. Birmingham Ladywood is Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary's constituency. She's just 1% ahead. She's under pressure from a pro-Gaza independent there, and that's going to be a problem for Labour on their left, I think, going forward in general. West Bromwich, they're under pressure from Reform there, 3%, and we looked at all those constituencies sort of on the outskirts of Birmingham, the suburbs, into sort of Walsall and Wolverhampton. We know Reform are doing well there. Walsall and Bloxwich, they're 7% ahead, Reform now. Wolverhampton North East, they're 6% ahead, and in Wolverhampton South, they're putting Labour under pressure. It's, again, Pat McFadden, Cabinet Secretary again, or Cabinet Minister again, less than 0.5% ahead. So, even in some of these city areas, Labour are coming under huge pressure. So look, we're at a fascinating point in British political history where the two-party system the two-party consensus that has persisted for many decades is crumbling in front of our eyes. Now, will it actually fall apart? Well, we'll have to wait and see. What will certainly happen is either it will fall apart, or the two main parties, Labour and the Conservatives, will have to change how they operate and who, their policies. Well, the consensus has changed, essentially, is what I'm saying. And the two main parties cannot operate like they have done for the last 20 or 30 years, because they will cease to exist. And that much, I think, is becoming clear. People have had enough. And at the moment, there's no one party that's galvanised that support to sort of take the bull by the horns and change the consensus. There's a few people hanging on, hoping that their preferred one of two parties will be the party to do that, whether that's Labour under Keir Starmer or the Conservatives under Kemi Badenoch or someone else, or indeed Reform. But no one has yet managed to galvanise or to convince the public that they are the change candidate, essentially, which is ironic because the last general election was generally fought on a change platform. Labour was all about changing the UK. Even the Conservatives, who've been in government for 14 years, said vote for us for change, and obviously Reform are obviously advertising reforming the country. So there is a shift in the consensus. The two main parties will have to adapt or die. That much is becoming clear. And can Reform capitalise on that? And is there a party? Is there a I suppose, is there a party on the left that will emerge that will essentially do to the Labour left what Reform is doing to that sort of more socially conservative Labour voter? That they, that's essentially the voter that they've hammered them across Yorkshire and the Midlands with. So very fascinating. Like I said at the beginning of the video, please do subscribe to the channel for more very fascinating times to be into politics in Britain. And we're going to keep looking at these nowcasts as they come out. They're going to keep changing. Like I say, small swings in the polls is going to have a big effect on how the map looks. I mentioned it earlier, we've got the council elections on the 1st of May coming up. I did a county council prediction video at the beginning of this month, or near the end of March. We've got this nowcast now, and we've got a bit more context coming into those elections. Reform have got a lot more momentum back. So I'm going to do another one of those videos, as promised, just before the elections on the 1st of May, so in the next week at some point. So hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you don't miss that, because there will be a lot of changes, I think, in that video from the last one. So that's it for this one. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and I will see you on the next one.